Fear and Hunger is the best indie game you've never probably heard of. It's a brilliantly made survival horror game that carved its own identity in the genre through its unique, nihilistic, depressing, and atmospheric lore, and holy shit is that lore expensive. Over the years, I've grown to love games that tackle adult themes well, and Fear and Hunger might as well be the Trent Williams of horror games. I don't know why I wrote in that joke. I don't know jack shit about football. Since you clicked on this video, you might be one of the many people who have heard of Fear and Hunger and have yet to try it out for themselves, and might find yourself wondering, is the game good? Yes. Should you play Fear and Hunger? Yes! Go play it. The video can wait. Now, there's already several channels dedicated to chronicling every single detail Fear and Hunger has to offer, so when it came to making my own video on it, I wanted to do something slightly different. Fear and Hunger has a lot of ways you can tackle its different endings, but Fear and Hunger 2 has already been out for about a year now, and with it, it set into stone some major canonical events for its prequel. So, I present to you the Fear and Hunger 1 canon. Many years ago, some very powerful deities known as the Old Gods ruled the world from the Mahabharata, the city of the gods. Gro-goroth, the destroyer of man. Sylvian, the goddess of love and fertility. The god of the depths, a big old tree worshipped by cockroaches? These were the gods of mankind, until they got bored and dipped out. As they left an empty throne, some not-so-cool dudes decided to take over their spot, called themselves New Gods, and through a rite of ascension by journey into the Mahabharata, ruled the world through tyranny. That trend kept repeating itself as more and more newer gods successively took their spots, until one day, a super rad dude known as the Almer, who was a mortal born to a virgin mother, with his 12 disciples, with his 12 apostles, wanted to bring forth a new world order. As the corrupt new gods felt threatened by his growing influence, they tied him up to a cross and killed him. Unbeknownst to them, he ascended to godhood through his death, eventually reviving and successfully creating a new world order by butchering every single new god from his time, making himself the new center of worship. And as time went on, the city of the gods and the ascension rite became long forgotten, buried in the annals of history. Cut to 1500 years later, a man prophesies to usher in a new age for humanity is born. That man, Gro-goroth, wants to ascend past his human limits and unify the world under his leadership through non-violence. He was a charismatic guy whose exploits as the leader of the band of Knights of the Midnight Sun reached far and wide. But one day, everything changed. The guards saw a transformation through the one thing that can drive any medieval man to ruin: pussy. I'm serious. All it took for my guy to go from war hero all the way down to a murder hobo that raced down an entire village, not even sparing the newborns, just to get his hands on a glorified Rubik's Cube, was clapping some cheeks. Did you have to do it? Was it really worth it? I know he got to drop a Mexican pancake on a new god, but he didn't even get to do it for real. It was just a wet dream. The Kingdom of Rundun, capital R, and his base of operations saw this as an opportunity to do the equivalent of canceling him on the platform formerly known as Twitter, and threw him to the catacombs, also known as the Dungeons of Fear and Hunger. And that's where the game finally starts. I skimmed over some of the more intricate details, but that should give you a general idea of the setting so far. Fear and Hunger 1 tells its story through the eyes of 4 different main characters. Cahara, mercenary extraordinaire and massive sex icon. Darcy? It's probably Dars, but Darcy rolls off the tongue better, so Darcy. Yeah, I got nothing. Enki, man with the first ever cat ears chin. And finally Ragnvaldr, Viking, potential cannibal, and middle-aged heartthrob. As I mentioned before, there are many ways to progress through the game. All of the main characters, including Lagarde, can be recruited to the party in different combinations. They can be killed, marry each other, and some entirely optional events that happen in the dungeon carry their own weight lore-wise. But the exact details are largely left up to interpretation. I like that. I'm probably just digging too much into it, but Could it be that the details of the events that happened in the first game were left unconfirmed to showcase that the dungeons swallow everything that happens in them? That whatever happened within the dungeon is information privy only to the people that experienced it firsthand. That being said, while the exact sequence of events varies from one playthrough to another, we can infer some of what really happened through a combination of character-specific endings and events from Fear and Hunger 2. And since the character-specific endings are achievable only in a solo run, we don't really know exactly who met who, so we'll tackle them one at a time for now.
Let's go!
Enki was born to a long lineage of dark priests. And those guys don't fuck around. They live in the shadows, abhor social relationships, just shady and unapproachable in general, have an insatiable thirst for power, and are completely undesirable by the opposite sex. Basically the equivalent of your average Reddit mod. After being put through a fight to the death with his own sister, he goes on a long, customary pilgrimage to learn more about the dark arts, traversing the entire continent. His progress later became acknowledged by the greatest scholars of his time, and eventually, he makes it to the prestigious Great Library of London. But his thirst for knowledge was only matched by your average shit-talker's thirst for clout. Even after learning everything he could, he still felt empty, and believing that he reached his mortal limits, offered himself to his fellow dark priests as a sacrifice to Ulmer, ready to accept his fate. But while he's crucified, he gets a vision of a prophesized man destined to usher in a new era for humanity, and Enki, seeing this, was fuming. How dare this guy slip over his toes to bask in the god's glory? So, he Giga Chad gets off the cross and goes on another journey just to see who this motherfucker really is. After learning that he's imprisoned, he then reaches the dungeons and makes his dive. And since he lived his life where the sun don't reach, he finds himself right at home in the dungeon's darkness and its ancient knowledge. During his dive, he learns of the Fellowship, a group of 5 who wanted to talk some sense into the old gods for abandoning humanity. The Fellowship found their way to the ancient Tomb of the Gods, reached the golden gates of the Mahabharata, and, blinded by their greed for glory, ascended to become new gods, following that same old routine as their predecessors. All except for one. And as Enki delves deeper into the dungeon, he slowly comes to realize that he's retracing the Fellowship's footsteps. And everything around him in this dank underground cesspool is so new to him that he ends up actually initiating a conversation with a woman for the first time in his life. Brings a tear to my eyes. Well, probably a woman. Nostradamus' gender is left ambiguous. Enki makes acquaintances with this mysterious figure, but doesn't stick around for too long because he still can't handle social contact that well. Hang in there, champ. And eventually, he makes it to the ancient city of the gods, now dilapidated and broken down. And being the bookworm, minus the book, that he is, he weasels his way into the city's grand library, housing so big a cacophony of ancient knowledge that he knows even multiple lifetimes of his wouldn't be enough to cover all of the books in there. The solution would obviously be to ascend to being a new god himself, and he's confident enough that he can do it while retaining his ego, but he meets a guy inside the library that was just hanging around in there for the past 800 years or so who convinces him otherwise. He tells Enki that the path to ascension the Fellowship took was a mistake, and that only their 5th member, Nostradamus, saw through it and possibly made the correct decision by not fully ascending. Now that he has an excuse to talk to them again, Enki rushes back to Nostradamus, who generously gives him an anchor that would help him resist his ascension to godhood. I don't know how he carried it because he's built like a broomstick, but he carries it back down, sits on a chair, resists ascending, gains enlightenment, starts working out, gets a full-time job, gets the girl, and lives happily ever after with his 9-to-5 job and a family of 5. Okay, the last 4 were a lie, but he does pretty much everything else. From here on out, details are gonna be a bit iffy. Even though he's a basement dweller that barely goes outside, we still know more about Enki than the rest of the cast combined. That being said, I don't want to swarm you with my big brain conspiracy theories yet, so let's address what we do know about the others first.
Let's go!
Darcy was a former noble that became a knight in Lagar's mercenaries. And that's all you need to know about her, because even he doesn't really care. Ah, I'm just kidding, she's alright. Darcy was born a noble in the capital of London. She went through extremely harsh training and became a holy knight at a fairly young age. But as someone that could see the 1% from a level field and their power-hungry policies, she very quickly grew disillusioned with her country's ruling class. This made her very susceptible to Hger's ideals, who then borderline seduced her to join him, all the while leaving her completely oblivious to his endgame. She falls in love with him during their time together as mercenaries, unaware that he's been African goggling some topless bimbo in his dreams the whole time. And she's so blinded by her love for Hger that she doesn't even bat an eye at him for massacring an innocent village, but is instead concerned for how the negative reputation would affect him. It's not meant to be commentary in modern day internet culture, but goddamn if that ain't accurate. She was proven right though, and the kingdom would then lynch Hger and take him captive, killing a large group of his men in the process. Darcy survives Rondon's attack, and after hearing of Hger's imprisonment in the Fear and Hunger dungeons, immediately rushes after him to bust him out. Darcy's ultimate role inside the dungeon is largely unknown, however, and people can only speculate as to what exactly she managed to achieve in there. However, just like the others, we do at least have some events that she likely went through by using her actions as an NPC and her S ending as references. Remember that artifact Hger committed war crimes for? It's called the Cube of the Depths, and it can open the path to the Mahabharata hidden deep within the dungeon, as well as act as a time machine to a period where the last 4 known new gods were still active. Through some unknown events, it made its way to some blind, naked cave people who use it as an object of worship next to a slumbering old god's body. Darcy sees these cave people performing some unholy ritual and tries to butt in, then gets attacked and almost killed by them. Although, even though her dialogue implies that she was possibly raped to people with their heads in the gutter like myself, that does not in fact happen in any timeline. Shame on you for implying those nice cave people are rapists. How far in she makes it after that, however, is up for debate, but if she does make it, she will be met by none other than Hger, either alive or as a bloodied corpse. So let's talk about that for a second, specifically at how Hger's plan is something only someone missing half of their frontal lobe would come up with. Let's break it down real quick. Originally, he wanted to unify the continent non-violently, but after getting a taste of New God Cooch, he starts craving that power for himself, so he studies the occult, somehow learns of the cube, kills some babies for it, gets attacked by a regimented army, and ultimately gets locked up in the dungeons where he gets tortured day in and out. In fact, I'm fairly certain that even though whether he survived in the torture cell or not was never explicitly talked about, he fucking dies in there canonically. So let's talk about his captivity, because if you find him alive on a normal playthrough, he has amnesia, and when you take him to the throne room, he admits that his captivity was all a part of his master plan? His evil genius plan being to gather all of the current New God's attributes onto himself. He wants to get the attribute of torment through his torture in the dungeon, enlightenment through the cube, endlessness by endlessly clapping cheeks in his dreams, and domination through his campaign as a mercenary. But bitch, you fucking die! Pretty miserably too! What kind of fucking idiot would leave their fate in the hands of a guy that looks like this? Here's the catch, I don't think he's actually that stupid. I think he's just so convinced that nothing bad could happen to the prophesized one that he fed too much into his delusions of grandeur that he thinks he can't fail at anything he tries. Anyway, we'll end Darcy and Hger's side of the story here for now and move on to our third protagonist. Ragnvaldr grew in a harsh environment with long winters and poor harvests, where he learned the art of war at a very young age. His village's source of sustenance was mostly gained through hunting and treasure-seeking expeditions by all of their able men, and he would partake in many of them as he grew up. The most notable expedition took him overseas. This journey was particularly treacherous, and he may or may not have partaken in some cannibalism to survive. They make it to the western continent, the most uncivilized land in the world, leaving him scarred from the horrors he witnessed. The expedition, however, retrieved an ancient artifact as they couldn't afford to return empty-handed. The same artifact that Hger knew he needed to reach the Mahabharata and massacred everyone in the village to get his hands on. Ragnvaldr, losing both his wife and his newborn child in the attack, would then set out on a journey to kill Hger and retrieve the artifact. And after seeing the similarities between the dungeon and the evils of the West, decided to kill any and all of the horrors inside them. Not much is confirmed about the exact route he took after going inside, but he very likely got himself a family pet for his future descendants. Unfortunately, that's all I can say about him for now. Before we wear our tinfoil hats, though, there's one more character we need to address. Okay, so visualize this with me. Your boss invites you to a company meal at a restaurant, and you order the day's special. But as it turns out, the special is spaghetti bolognese with asparagus. You love bolognese, but you hate asparagus. But this is still a semi-formal setting, and your sense of morality kicks in, so you don't want to leave the plate half full, and you're too embarrassed to tell the waiter that you want a different meal. Would you eat your favorite half of the meal first? Or save it for last? You're probably wondering, what the fuck does some linguine have to do with the game? Because while there might be a little bit of fear in this scenario somewhere, there is no hunger to be seen. Well, Cahara is the best character in the game. Fucking dumb analogy, that. Not only because he gets one of the best skills through his introduction, Escape Plan, which doubles your odds of running away from encounters, but also because he's the only one of the bunch that's absolutely DTF at every opportunity he gets. Fucking love this guy. His backstory is the one that people can relate to the most out of the playable cast. He's a born commoner that was abandoned by his parents as soon as he was born, and growing up in the unforgiving underbelly of society, he had to resort to thievery to get by. As he grew older, Cahara joined various mercenary armies, teaching him some of the slimiest tricks in the books to survive. He does end up traveling to London, however, where he settles down for a while. He finds himself in a romantic romp with a prostitute that was stuck in a nameless brothel, and he was determined to buy her freedom. His income was too low though, driving him to near desperation, enough that when he gets the shadiest task asking him to retrieve a mercenary held down in the country's catacombs, he ignores his gut feeling and takes the job anyway. Swear to God, he's like every horror movie protagonist out there. He makes it to the dungeon, resolved to make this his make it or break it mission. If he can't retrieve Regard for whatever reason, he has to come back with something valuable enough to compensate. Once again, there are some events that are likely to have happened with him inside the dungeon, so let me list a couple. In case a different protagonist is coming through the dungeon, he would be in a cell in the dungeon's prison area. Now, normally, the way you get inside this cell is by getting knocked out by one of the deformed guards, after which they'll drag you in to, have some fun. But here's where it gets interesting. Cahara knows lockpicking. He could have very easily snuck himself in there and wait for an unsuspecting Good Samaritan to steal all of their wine. But he also takes it up the ass like a champ. One of these is a red herring, and I'll let you guys choose which one it is. The second event with a strong likelihood of happening is his acquisition of some treasure maps from a shady iron-masked adventurer. He has the motives to invest, and is experienced enough with finding riches that he would take the job. And that's the most we know he would have done under the right circumstances, unfortunately. Godspeed, you beautiful bastard. Godspeed. Alright, if for some reason you haven't played the game yet and have ignored my advice to play it by now and still find yourself interested, go play it first and then come back. This next part will probably be a little confusing and very spoilery. We still haven't figured out when and how all of the canon events that we already know occurred by Termina happened, but I think I figured it all out. The first one of the playable four to enter the dungeon was Darcy. She's the closest to them by being part of the guard's mercenaries, and her unrequited crush on him is intense enough that she would rush to save him at the first given opportunity after his arrest. She makes it down quite a bit through the dungeons, but as she is both a born noble, a knight, and an avid Almer enjoyer, she butts in Karen style after seeing some naked cave people perform their unholy rituals. She gets beaten up by them and would have died otherwise, but gets bailed out by the second person to make the dungeon dive. That being Ragnvaldr. He's been chasing after Legard non-stop across the entire continent, and it makes a perfect amount of sense for him to make it earlier than the rest. And given their close proximity, the party of two recovers the Cube of the Depths from the cave dwellers, as Ragnvaldr would be the most likely to retrieve it, since his people died for that thing. Ragnvaldr would also have recruited Moonless by this point, which Darcy avoided one way or another, and they together would form a party of three. Either during or slightly before this, Cahara and Enki make it in. I don't think it's very important which of these two made it first, but what's important is what they encounter. Cahara, being there primarily for riches, would comb through the floors for any artifacts he could find, and Enki would do the same with the dungeon's books, making their trek down slower than the other three. Cahara frees the girl, since he's the only one with a functioning human heart out of the four protagonists, and takes her down with him. Enki, on the other hand, continues to go down solo, taking pit stops at any bookshelves he can find. Now, using knowledge from Termina, we know that Nashra managed to dive into the dungeon to meet the traces of Gro-goroth, and had to have seen Ragnvaldr kill the dungeon's horrors as he's wary of his descendants. And considering how none of the main cast dies to summon the Tormented One, they would have to go through his hidden lab, which he would have to be in the party to tell them about. Logically, the only two candidates that would be able to recruit him are Enki and Cahara. Nashra's recruitment conditions are as follows. Having a talisman that can be acquired through talking to one of the only two yellow mage enemies in the entire game. Having acquired the Cube of the Depths, the protagonists telling Nashra of their intent to go deeper into the dungeon, and bowing down to him when he orders them to do so. Naturally, Ragnvaldr wants to kill all of the dungeon's evils, and Darcy, being a knight with an Almer bias, would never satisfy those conditions. This leaves us with the other two. Enki is the one with the most grounded knowledge on the old gods. He's the most likely to talk to a yellow mage for the talisman. He would tell Nashra that he wants to go deeper to feed his curiosity, and would bow down to him to acquire his knowledge. Cahara, on the other hand, is capable of stealing the talismans very easily, needs to go down deeper to acquire the dungeon's riches, and would bow down to Nashra 10 times out of 10 to save his own ass. Both are viable options, but for my money, it has to be Cahara. Since the cube is in the hands of the Ragnvaldr party, who are probably busy tag teaming some bosses by now for Ragnvaldr's S ending, and Enki would have to meet Nostramus alone, because Nashra is an asshole, by process of elimination that only leaves Cahara. Cahara also has the advantage of having the girl with him, which, while Nashra doesn't appear to care much about her on the surface, he would still totally be interested in seeing her being taken deeper into the dungeon, so her existence can low-key substitute for the cube. As they head down the dungeon, the different groups do in fact group up at some point. All of them need to go to the past for certain events that will lead to the canon timeline. There's only one cube, and they've all been to the dungeon shortly after the time Legard was first held captive. So they would have to group up eventually, but they would separate on different occasions. After finding Legard dead and making it to the Mahabharata as a group, Cahara would likely leave right after Nilvan. The crown he needs for his S ending is right next to the tower. He would need Nilvan to ask him to take the girl to the depths for him to even get the idea, and he's the only one qualified to do so. He also leaves your party around this time during a normal playthrough if you refuse to give him the crown, so I think this makes the most sense. Darcy would also immediately leave the party right after finding the resurrection spell for Legard, and since one of the last fragments of the spell is in the Grand Library, she would have to leave somewhere around Valtail, but before Chambara. Considering how Enki would temporarily leave the party in the Grand Library in the normal playthrough, I think it's safe to assume that he leaves to get the Soul Anchor while Ragnvaldr, Nashra, Moonless, and potentially Darcy kill Valtail in the past, then rejoins them after they move back to the present to go to Nashra's laboratory. The lineup of Ragnvaldr, Nashra, Moonless, and Enki is the final one in my opinion, and they would kill the last heart of the God of the Depths, opening the passage for Cahara and the girl to go down for her ascension. And while she's ascending, the party would be back in the past fighting Francois. Darcy, in the meanwhile, would have revived Legard through the spell she acquired. And after Francois is killed, Enki ascends, Ragnvaldr returns to the present after fulfilling his quest, the God of Fear and Hunger is already born, and Legard would come back to the world thinking he's already become a god, though he's likely to be nothing more than an undead, skinless abomination. Cahara would unfortunately meet his demise after witnessing the girl's ascension, leaving behind his pregnant wife with nobody to look after. I guess you could say his childhood grew up to be an orphan. Fuck, just scrap that part, that made no sense. Ragnvaldr would learn that Legard lives either during his dungeon exit or sometime after that, and dedicate his life and his family lines to killing Legard. Nashra would go down to the depths now that the path is open and would get fried by Gro-goroth, and Legard would interact with Nashra later on since he would come back to the dungeons to excavate them, though the order of these last events is debatable. So yeah, let me know if that makes sense to you guys as well as it did to me, and I hope you enjoyed my inane plot ramblings. Stay courageous and satiated, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Coming soon.